So welcome, folks. Can you all hear me on Zoom?
Yes, we can.
Okay, so
Yes.
if you wouldn't mind muting yourselves, and I'll begin. Right, okay. So the story behind this lantern slide collection was we had a visit by the Exeter Magic Lantern Society, I think back in June or July. And we showed them around the observatory. We would just come out of lockdown, I think, so we were all a bit nervous, but it all went very well. And at the end of the meeting, one of the gents there, Peter Gillis, said, would you like to buy my collection of lantern slides, which I purchased in about, it must have been about 1985, when they had the original auction of all equipment in Lockheed's office in the Longhouse. So we had a look at them and they looked in fantastic condition. So the NLO purchased the complete collection of about 300 lantern slides for about, I think, about 750 quid. And that is actually good value. If you go on eBay and look at the value of some of these things, each of these slides, each probably worth about £15 each. So it is a wonderful social history record of life in the Edwardian era. And remember, Edward VII, the Playboy King of Victoria, elder son of Victoria, was king at that time for 10 brief years. So this is the story of the lantern slides, which I've imaged just with a simple phone app on my camera. So they're not the best of the quality, but they are show literally what the subject is, and it's good enough to show as a simple demonstration. So they come with a list of, they've obviously been catalogued before. I don't know who made this catalogue, but it was a Magic Lantern slideshow which will be run along the same lines, which I'm going to show you this afternoon. Most of these slides were taken by Jim Lockyer, and they cover a wide variety of subjects, from Lockyer's Eclipse Expeditions to his ballooning and his early aircraft, Wright flyers. He was a motoring enthusiast, and there are lots of nice portraits as well. So, Jim Lockyer, I suppose you call this would be a selfie. His dates, of course, 1868 to 1936. He was obviously a baby when Lockyer made his historic discovery of hydrogen and helium on the sun. In his own right, he trained as an astronomer. He was a very keen photographer. We've actually got his original little camera in the entrance foyer. He was a keen aeronaut, meteorologist, and a motoring enthusiast. A lot of his cloud photography has gone to the to the Met Office. So let's start off with just keep an eye on it. Alan Martin's joining us. Welcome, Alan. We've just started. So let's start off with this picture. You've probably all seen it before, but what is new in this picture is the lady at the top here is Lockyer's daughter, Rosie. And she married a man who Lockyer didn't approve of. He said the marriage would never last, and it didn't. So poor Rosie ended up life as an actress on the stage, which was frowned upon by Norman. Left to right, then we have Jim, and this is Hughes Campbell. Hughes Campbell joined the Navy. He was decorated after the Dardanelles expedition because he's brought his ship in so close to the shore under gunfire, which meant that all the troops could evacuate the ship and get on the shore with very little loss of life. It was very brave of him to bring the ship in that near. But unfortunately, he was court-martialed about 7 years later for being drunk in charge of a ship. We all know Winifred. She was, of course, followed her father. She never married, but she was secretary of the NLO right up until her death, which I guess was been about the late 1930s. Then we have Ormond. Ormond emigrated to Australia. I think he ended up sheep farming in Gippsland in New South Wales. Some of his descendants are regular visitors here to the NLO. I know Pam came here about 7 or 8 years ago. She was the granddaughter of him, I think. And over on the far right, we have Alexander. We don't know much about Alexander. We do have his binoculars engraved in one of the display cabinets. I think he emigrated to America, but we believed he got lost at sea. I don't know whether it was on board ship or whether it was just a drowning accident, but perhaps we need to research that a bit more. Now on this little phone app I've got, you can put colour pictures on it. It does bring some of the characters a bit more to life.
How true to life would that be, do you think? How will they base that on?
Well, whether all wore blue suits, I don't know. But the red bricks, right, and the sort of the colour. I don't know about the colour of their hair because they all got the same colour. But I suppose the facial turns. This is all done with AI, isn't it? So I don't know how it does work. So now we come on to the portraits. This is obviously a view of Norman and Mary gazing out over the Sid Valley. Presumably, it must date around about the time when they decided to build the observatory up here. Obviously, there was no trees then, and the gorse looks more heather than gorse. Now, Lockheed, as we know, had a holiday home at Westgate-on-Sea on the North Kent coast. And this is a picture from August 1907. I'm guessing this is Rosie. I'm guessing that's a friend of hers. But it's titled A Study in Feet. And the next one is a photograph of her feet. So really fancy dresses they had in those days. This is Miss Amy Rimmer. I haven't been able to find out what the connection was with the family. September 1906. Probably looks like it was taken from Westgate, probably on the promenade. This is a photograph of Alice Stower. This was at the meeting of the British Association in York. That was the forerunner of the British Astronomical Association, I believe. But I Googled Alice Stower and I came across the fact that she was married to Sidney Brown. Now, he was a prolific inventor and he actually purchased the Lockyer home after the death of Mary Lockyer, which is hence the name of the house Brownlands, which was a hotel until the mid-1970s, after which it was pulled down and redeveloped. But Sidney Brown himself was a very prolific inventor. The loudspeaker, the gyro compass, and the electrical stethoscope. Apparently, a doctor in Brighton could put this device on a patient, and the consultant in Harley Street would listen to it through his telephone. So in those days, 1906, it was state-of-the-art technology. Another Jim Lockyer photo of 1903. Subjects are unknown, but note the gollywog, a children's toy of that era. Of course, I believe they're banned now. Certainly frowned upon. A walk on the promenade. Of course, in those days, umbrellas were used to keep the sun off your face. It was far more fashionable to have pale skin than a nice suntan. And this would be typical sunbathing attire in 1903. And I've colorized that one. Deck chairs haven't changed much, have they? This is a lovely photo. I haven't seen this one before. This is Francis McLean photographing a game of tennis, players unknown. And he's smoking his pipe. You might well have a there, I don't know. I guess this is Westgate on Sea, probably a Punch and Judy show, I don't know. Anyone else got any thoughts? This will be of interest to you, Alan. This was a slide I found of, it says the diagrams giving the apertures and epochs of large telescopes, 1923, WJS Lockyer.
Somebody trying to come in, David.
Oh, right. So on the left here, we've got all the refractors. On the right, we've got the reflectors. And we've got the date. We've got here 1820, William Herschel. And he has a, what was it, a 48-inch telescope. 1840, we've got Lord Ross's, looks like 36-inch reflector. And then Ross's 72-inch, the big 6-foot reflector in Ireland. Then we have the Brewer, Lassell, I've got again about 1845. He set up big telescopes on Malta. Another big one, 1863, Lassell. That looked like a 48-inch telescope. Then we have the Melbourne reflector, 1870, Paris, 1875, Calver at Lick. Then we have Ainsley Common. Now, of course, Common built the large reflector, ground the large reflector we have outside in the foyer. And that here, he's entered as Sidmouth, 1887, I reckon. So at that time, 1890, Lockyer's 30-inch was the 12th largest reflecting telescope in the world. And then, of course, since then, the apertures increased. And on this side, of course, we have the refractors. The largest refractor at the time, I guess that's a Russian one, Nikolaev, 32-inch refractor. And of course, this is a photo of Lockyer's 30-inch at his holiday home, Westgate on Sea. I guess this little small one housed his 6-inch refractor. Now we come on to Lockyer's ballooning photos. The Royal Aeronautical Society apparently was started by Charles Rolls who went on a motoring expedition with Francis Hedges Butler. The car broke down, so they decided to go ballooning instead. And that was the founding of the Royal Aeronautical Society. Within a few years, it got very fashionable, and they used to take off, all the balloons used to take off from Hurlingham, which is Fulham on the banks of the Thames, set in about 40 acres of ground. And it was a favourable launch site because the prevailing winds would carry the balloons right over London, and they would land, hopefully land on the Isle of Sheppey, which of course is a fairly flat, safe area for landing a balloon. And the Isle of Sheppey obviously features later on in the history of aviation. So this is a view taken May the 30th, 1908. And this is called the mat where the balloons were taken off. I don't know why all this dark staining is there. I think these balloons were powered by coal gas. So, I mean, that's pretty explosive mixture, isn't it? Mainly hydrogen, I would have thought, but it looks like they've, it makes a stain when they disconnect, I suppose. And here's some wonderful shots of London. This is South Kensington from Maclean's balloon Britannia at a height of 1,800 feet on July the 11th, 1908. This we now know as the Natural History Museum, isn't it? Here's Charing Cross Station, Trafalgar Square, Nelson's Column. This is an unusual viewpoint of the Tower of London. I was trying to work out the perspective on this, but I guess these are little turrets around the edge. So you're looking at a slight angle from this direction. And there's Buckingham Palace, 1909. I don't suppose that's changed much over the years. The motoring slides, the wonderful designs of these cars of that era. And I like that guy, he's probably the chauffeur in his big trench coat. This is Frank McLean's motor car. I think it's some aviation meeting. I can't read what this says. Begins with a B. Brands Hatch, perhaps? I don't know. Subjects unknown. I think there was no detail on this slide. But of course, no seat belts in those days. I mean, it looked more like a horse carriage converted, didn't it? And I guess these lights were powered by paraffin, I don't know.
Exactly.
Was it? Now we come to the early aircraft. This is a very historic picture of the Wright brothers at Shell Bay on the Isle of Sheppey. Now, presumably where these balloons landed, it was nice and flat, is where Frank McLean decided to set up his first private airfield. He invites, the story begins when McLean and Jim Lockheed go to an eclipse, I think it's the Tongan eclipse, but they travel back over the States and they meet up with the Wright brothers at Dayton, Ohio. McLean immediately falls in love with the whole idea of flying aeroplanes, and he arranges to buy one. And what's more, he arranges for the Wright brothers to come over to visit and arrange a deal with the Short brothers. These were two brothers who were making the balloons for them under the railway arches of Waterloo Station. They were good engineers, and so they were made under license. And Maclean tells the Short brothers, any aircraft that you can't sell, I will buy and make sure you're kept in business. So Frank Maclean ends up with 13 aircraft. He donates 2 to the Royal Navy. And if you go to the Fleet Air Arm Museum, you'll see him regarded as the godfather of the Royal Naval Air Service. There's a special little section devoted to Frank Maclean. Lovely photograph of him at the controls of his Wright Flyer, August the 7th, 1909. This aeroplane cost £1,000 in 1909, £70,000 in today's money. The Fleet Air Arm Museum very kindly gave us a copy of the receipt. So here he is, received from F.K. Maclean the sum of £1,000, payment in full on flyer number 3, October 26, 1909. And there he is flying the airplane a year later. I haven't seen a picture, this is the first time I've seen a picture of Frank Maclean airborne in his flimsy aircraft. I mean, look how thin those struts are. Amazing that it flew at all. Basically made of timber. This obviously is a few years later. I'm guessing this is probably post First World War. Looks like a sort of tiger moth. I don't know the make of the aircraft. But obviously it's an unfortunate landing and he's smashed his landing gear and it looks like the propeller as well. This is the famous Bournemouth International Air Show in July 1910. It shows Claude Graham-White, the controls of a Wright Flyer. He was one of the very earliest flying instructors and ran the Graham-White School of Flying at Hendon. And that's of personal significance to me because Graham-White taught my great uncle Louis Strange to fly. 1912, these aren't copies of lantern slides, but just filling in the story. This was the famous Thames flight that Frank Maclean did. He left the Isle of Shapley at 6 a.m. on 11th of August 1912. He flew out on the Thames under Tower Bridge and lands at Westminster at 8:30 in the morning. And that's a copy of the flight magazine showing him landing in the Thames. And that is his historic flight under Tower Bridge. He was using a short pusher biplane. What that meant, a pusher had the aeroplane, the propeller sitting behind the pilot, so it was pushing rather than pulling. I think they call the propeller at the front the tractor, and when the propeller was behind the pilot, it was a pusher. And following on from that, of course, Frank Maclean did his famous Nile Flight in 1914 with a 4-man support crew. He created his short seaplane to Alexandria and flew up the Nile to Khartoum in January 1914. The journey took 3 months. There were 13 breakdowns, and overheating was a major problem. It's a lovely photo of him smoking his pipe, sitting on his float of his aeroplane, looking very relaxed. James Bond pose. And he made it January 1914. He reached Aswan at 11 a.m. And of course, in doing that flight, there were no fuel stations en route, so they had to drop off fuel at depots along the banks of the Nile, so you could top up every few miles. Back onto the lantern slides now. This is a lovely shot of Mary Lockyer walking through the gorse on a footpath on top of Salcombe Hill. And there she is with the tripod. I'm not sure whether it's whether she's painting or whether it was a photograph that she was taking. We can probably take a similar picture today and see how the Sid Valley has developed since then. Probably a lot more houses. This is a lovely shot of the Solar Physics Observatory. I'm guessing this would be early 1900s, before it was closed down. And I've colorized this one. And here we have I'm guessing that's about a 30-inch reflector. And they're all students of the day. On to the Eclipse Expeditions. This is the 1898 expedition to Sidereal in India. The expedition left England in December 1897 on the good ship HMS Melpomene, captained by Chisholm Batten. And you can see a lot of Lockyer's Eclipse expeditions required a big complement of personnel, sometimes up to 200 or 300 people. He would accompany him on these expeditions. The Victorian expedition was a huge logistics problem. Involved transport of heavy equipment by horse and cart to take all the equipment to the ship, followed by a long sea voyage. And on this occasion, there were 150 personnel were required to make the observations. So you had your people, your cooks, your security guards, masons, carpenters, all sorts to enable observations to be made. This is a lovely old ship, Melpomene. Must have been a really exciting voyage to go on an eclipse trip in those days. The eclipse camp was heavily guarded. And Lockyer writes, he's written up his account of this eclipse trip. He says, it was important to erect huts as soon as possible, not only to shelter the instruments, but the observers from the sun. So they put up a lot of these screens. And the instruments used on this eclipse were the 6-inch and 9-inch prismatic cameras. There would have been a 6-inch lens with a plate camera at the focus position, integrating spectroscope, a 6-inch equatorial coronagraph, and discs. Discs were little 2 or 3 inch discs that were held aloft on a big pole, and the observer would align the disc with the disc of the sun. You work out so it just covered the discs. So during the eclipse, they will be able to see the extremities of the solar corona and make drawings of it. So they had quite a few observers drawing the details of the solar corona during the eclipse itself. During the week preceding the eclipse, the adjustments were frequently tested and a complete system of drills were established. Lockyer was a real stickler for having regular drills so that each person knew exactly what they were doing during the precious few minutes of a solar eclipse. You'd have one person handing the plates to the chap loading them, and it all had to be timed, so they got as many images as they could. Now, one thing I have come across is this chap. James Graham, the 6th Duke of Montrose, he set up a kinematograph for the Eclipse. Now, if you Google this chap, it said he was the first person to record a cine film of an eclipse. But in actual fact, that's not really true, because Lockyer writes, the kinematograph films taken by Lord Graham were too badly fogged to serve any useful purpose. But the other interesting thing is that I'm related to this chap, James Graham. My middle name is Graham, and from my father's mother's side goes back through the Grahams of Montrose and Fintry. So somewhere in the distant line, he's probably a great uncle or something. I must work it out exactly. But there is a family connection with that chap. The erection of huts was also begun by the native workmen. And Lockyer called them coolies, not very appropriate today, and continued without intermission. This is the Empire Palace. What was essential was to have a very accurate clock. And all of Lockyer's expeditions, he had an eclipse clock. This one was called Big Ben. And of course, it's very dangerous to look at an eclipse. The moment after that first diamond ring comes out and the flash, if you've still got your eye on the telescope, you'll be blinded. So what they had a bugler bugling out when it was safe, and there was special signals given every 10 seconds. And I'm sure they gave a 10 seconds warning when the eclipse was due to end. But I love the special signals during totality were given every 10 seconds, beginning at 127, that's the seconds the eclipse was due to last, by means of the eclipse clock, which was started at the signal go by cutting a thread, thereby releasing the pendulum. So our lantern slide collection is a very valuable resource, showing the remarkable and varied lives of the great Victorian adventurers and entrepreneurs of that era. These images of the flimsy aircraft from 1909, remember, were the latest technology of their time. Although they look as though they've come from a bygone era, remember, it was only 112 years ago. And since then, we've landed on the moon and can now send civilians into space. And Professor Jason Hall from the Exeter Uni Digital Humanities Department has applied for a collaborative doctoral award for funding of a PhD student to scan and research our lantern slide collection in a bit more detail. And this is a page that made the Sidmouth Herald a few weeks ago, showing some of the slides which I've shown you today. But just before I finish, I want to tell you another story about a postcard that was delivered to us on September the 24th, having taken 100 years to reach us. It had been sent to Jim Lockyer, by the librarian of the Science College at the Imperial University, Tokyo, and it was sent on April the 10th, 1921. Now, it arrived in an envelope, but there was no covering letter to say who'd sent it. There was a postcode on the back of the letter, which I presume was an English postcode, but I've tracked the postcode down to Petworth in East Sussex. I actually put a story about this on the BAA forum, hoping that someone might be able to spread a bit of publicity for it, and we might find out who sent it. But the story did actually make the BAA AGM on the last topic, the current president, told this story. So we might find out exactly a bit more about how this came to be sent to us. But the interesting thing about it is, of course, 1920, it was still the Hill Observatory. Lockyer had died in August 1920. The other thing to note that Jim Lockyer sent his spectroscopic magnitude observations of Nova Cygni, number 3, 1920. Now, this nova had been discovered by this chap, William Denning, at 9:30 on August the 20th, 1920, at which time it was a magnitude 3.7 star, so it was quite bright, but it reached a peak magnitude of minus 1.23 on the 23rd of August. There's a photograph of it there. But what is interesting is Norman Lockyer died on August the 16th, just 4 days prior to this star appearing in the sky. Jim Lockyer made nightly observations of the star throughout September. It must have been a very clear September, but he must secretly have thought that his father was sending a message from the heavens. That's its peak brightness, below magnitude 2, and then it faded off right down to the 7th magnitude by the end of October. And here is a spectrum of the nova taken by Jim Lockyer with, I think this was with a 10-inch McLean telescope. Now, one of my friends, Nick James, saw this, the message I put on the BA forum, and kind of got a picture of this star as it was a few nights ago. So it's very faint now, currently a magnitude 18. But it is a variable star, so it does brighten a little bit, so that's one to keep an eye on. So with that, I will finish. Thank you very much.
So really amazing resource of social and astronomical history, I must say. I think it's very special and right that his observatory holds from there. So, what sort of percentage of the ones you've shown relate to the total collection?
Oh, there's a total of about 300. So I've only shown a few.
Yes.
But John's very kindly going to have a go at scanning them all.
Yes, I'm
Yeah.
happy to do that.
So, I think it's important we try and get all these digitized. I mean, it's a project we've been trying to do for many years now,
Yes.
and hopefully we're getting there.
David, what's the earliest slide you have
The earliest one,
in this collection?
oh gosh, I'm guessing would have been the lantern slide, probably late 1890s, I should think. I haven't actually dated them all, no. Most of them are from the early 1900s to about mid-1920s, I should think, of this particular collection.
So they're all James Lockyer's. There's none of Norman Lockyer's photos in them.
They're mostly James Lockyer's. Some of them would have been from Norman Lockyer. Norman, of course, did a lot of lectures, public lectures, and a lot of his lecture slides are included in this collection.
Do you know, David, when the auction took place, this chap bought 300, were others sold off as well?
I don't know. I'm guessing, of course, a lot of our lantern slides ended up at the Roborough building, which we had back, but presumably some were sold during that auction, and they were bought. this chap, Peter Gillis, bought them privately from a dealer who bought them at the auction.
That's right.
So, well, I don't know. Other than that, that's the only lead I've got to how we got hold of them.
An amazing coincidence, really, isn't it?
Mm.
So, questions? And there's still a lot of work in progress with this collection, isn't there?
So, Keith, I think what we need to do now, you need to join Zoom
Right.
so that we could show your screen. Imagine you're at home, so you need to,
All right.
and I'll let you
Let me
in.
just.
So I think next up, Keith is going to talk about Harlow Shapley.
That's right. Yes.
So we just connect him to Zoom and he will share his screen.
Hopefully. Now, can you remind me of the details here?
If you drop down
Oh,
there,
yeah.
you should get there we are, that first one.
Yeah.
Join. Have you joined our Wi-Fi before with this computer?
No,
Oh, okay. So you need to go to your internet. Let's click that on there.
Oh, yes, on the internet.
Okay. Now go to NLO. Connect. Now the password is NGC small letters.
sorry.
NGC
GC, yes.
1961. Star. Where's the star? Oh, there it is. So it would be,
Yes.
and then next. Okay, we're connected. So now you can join the meeting. And now we need the,
Oh, yes, got to go through this again.
that's right, that one.
That one.
Join.
Yeah.
Meeting passcode. Yeah. We'll get there at the end.
Oh, yeah. It's easier to get in the front now.
Oh, here we go, here we go. Right, let number 3, small case F, small case A,
Yeah.
large letter S, small case N, small case Z. Now I've got to let you in.
Join the video. Did you click on join? Yeah.
Yeah.
Video, yeah.
Okay, I've let you in, Keith. And now you need to share your screen.
Yeah.
And now share. That's all. I think we're there. Drag it down.
Well, that's right. We've got full screen.
Yeah.
Right, I think we're here. Turn off.
Would you like to talk to the microphone here?
Yes.
Can you all hear that? And see
Yes,
the screen?
we've got the picture,
You have. Good.
and we can hear you as well.
Good to go.
Good. Well, thank you, David, for all that technology. I'd never have done it myself. So, yes, 2nd of November 1885 was the day when Harlow Shapley was born. So that's a fairly early photograph of him. Let's see if I can get this to operate. Yes. Born in the country, 5 miles outside Nashville in Missouri. His household was not very academic at all, very few books, and his school education, in fact, didn't extend beyond elementary school. So he didn't have any aspiration for anything scientific in those days. From the age of 15, he joined, he worked as a journalist on the local newspaper as a crime reporter. He then discovered reading at that age and embarked, apparently, on a 6-year high school program, which he completed in 18 months. So he must have been really very dedicated to catch up on lost time, I suppose. In 1907, when he was 22, he went to the University of Missouri to study journalism. That was what he was aiming for at that stage. But when he found that the School of Journalism at the university was it was about to establish, was postponed for 1 year, he decided he'd look for something else. So he went to the school directory and looked down the alphabetical list and soon came to astronomy and decided that's what he would go for. So there you are. Talk about... at university, he realized he had quite a wide range of aptitudes, not just for science, but for English literature, French and Latin, and he really got on very well. But his talents in astronomy were stimulated by his teacher, someone called Frederick Sears, who was an important staff member of the Mount Wilson Observatory, the one that had been established by George Ellery Hale. Well, and that's a photo of, just reminding you of Hale, the founder of the Mount Wilson Observatory. After graduation in 1911, Shapley received a fellowship to Princeton University to study under Henry Norris Russell. And he used the more recently established period luminosity relationship for Cepheid variable stars to determine distances to globular clusters. So he was getting into astronomy at a very important time in understanding how things were going. And there's a photo here showing Shapley with Russell, Henry Norris Russell, who doesn't look at all happy on that photo, I must say. Apparently he was extremely shy as a person and obviously didn't like being photographed. But anyway, so you've got Shapley on the left and Russell on the right. Around 1910, Russell and the Danish astronomer Ejnar Hertzsprung had independently produced what eventually became known as the HR diagram. And that's a photo of their original diagram that looks pretty speculative, I must admit, showing the stars plotted in terms of absolute magnitudes and spectral class. And they followed certain specific shapes in this diagram. But he decided that this was of fundamental importance to future of astronomy, as it indeed turned out to be, because HR diagrams summarize basically the life cycles or the evolutions of stars. And this is a more modern one showing so many more stars. And these are the stars that have been plotted with either absolute magnitude on the left there, and that links to luminosity relative to the sun, or on the bottom here, the spectral class, or in terms of the temperatures of the stars. And they form this very distinctive pattern. And the important one, of course, is this main sequence of stars. Most stars spend most of their time in that particular main sequence. It's only towards the end of their life that they move away from that sequence and become either supergiants up here or white dwarfs down here. So that was a very important correlation that Hertzsprung and Russell found. And this next photo shows a picture now of Russell with Hertzsprung in 1922. So he would say, starting astronomy at a very important time, historically. In 1914, he showed that Cepheid variables weren't eclipsing variables. There had been a lot of controversies to what they actually were. They weren't eclipsing variables, but they were actually pulsating stars with varying periods of time, varying from about 1 day to tens of days. And this also applied to another group of stars, the RR Lyrae variables that have got a period slightly less than a day. So this was an important discovery as well. But in 1917, Shapley made what probably is his most important discovery by showing that globular clusters were centered around a point which he calculated was about 55,000 light years away in the direction of Sagittarius. And therefore that represented the center of our Milky Way system. He wasn't very correct in his calculation. 55,000 now is now more like 28,000 light years by present day standards, but it was in the same, in the right ballpark. And that's just a picture showing these various features of the Milky Way. And the sun's location, he found, was way off from the center of the Milky Way. And the Milky Way has this characteristic shape with a sort of bulge in the center. It spreads over around about 100,000 light years. In 1919, Shapley then published a paper that turned out to be quite important one, Remarks of the Arrangement of the Sidereal Universe. And he realized that our galaxy was far larger than previously thought. And our sun occupied a really nondescript position in the galaxy. That's what his observations had told him. And he was confident that that would be the case. But not everyone agreed, and it stimulated a great debate, as it was called, on the nature of nebulae and galaxies and the size of the universe. There were many different views at that time about all this. The great debate took place on 26th of April 1920 in the hall of the US National Academy of Sciences building in Washington, D.C. The main debaters were an astronomer called Heber Curtis of the Lick Observatory in California, and Shapley, who was then working at the Mount Wilson Observatory. So that's the two of them that were debating this important question. Shapley's argument was that the universe is large, with the Milky Way galaxy of the order of 300,000 light years across, and the spiral nebulae, which we now know as galaxies, were part of the Milky Way. That was his main argument. Curtis, on the other hand, argued that the spiral galaxies were beyond the Milky Way, and the universe was relatively small. As we know, both people were partially correct, but the main issue was in favor of the Curtis position that the universe consists of numerous galaxies. That's what the more detailed study showed. And this was a few years later supported by Edwin Hubble's subsequent findings of the Cepheid variables in the Andromeda galaxy, M31. That's a photo of Hubble. Based on Shapley's own calibrations, he had to admit that the M31 stars were clearly far beyond the Milky Way. That is Shapley at the same time, about the same time. And so he had to admit, Shapley had to admit that Hubble was right, that the universe contained many island galaxies. The two of these astronomers were not very friendly with each other. They were both tended to be very arrogant people, and there was not much love lost between them. But on this occasion, Shapley Shapley lost the argument in terms of the nature of the galaxy, of the universe. But despite this setback, Shapley was appointed director of the Harvard College Observatory in 1921 and went on to map some 76,000 galaxies and suggested the existence of galaxy superclusters, which is something that is accepted today. He was director of the Harvard College Observatory until 1952, so quite a period of time, during which he hired, also, it's worth noting, Celia Payne Gaposchkin. She was a British-born and did a PhD in astronomy and proposed that stars are composed mainly of hydrogen and helium, which was definitely not the general consensus at the time. She was a very impressive, one of the early female astronomers. That's a photo of her taken there. She also suggested that stars could be classified according to their temperatures, which of course we do nowadays, so she was spot on with that as well. In later life, Shapley's career research was more concerned with the southern sky, and he was in charge of quite a large staff at Harvard College Observatory, with about many women in the sort of 100 or so people working for him. He and his wife, which are shown down below here, she also was an astronomer and wrote on articles on the subject. They were very popular, very sociable and cultured people. And, well, you can see the photo of them there. In the 1940s now, Shapley became a political activist, particularly involving the National Science Foundation and UNESCO. And it's said that, in fact, he was most influential in adding the S to the UNESCO, introducing science into this organization. 1947, he became president of the American Association for the Advancement of Science. And in 1949, he chaired the Cultural and Scientific Conference for World Peace in New York. So he was very much into political activation. He died in Boulder, Colorado in 1972, just before his 87th birthday. So he had a long and full life. And this is one of the quotes that I've just dug out, which I think is very sound. Theories crumble, but good observations never fade. And there's another one, another couple here, based on his observation. The solar system is off-center, and apparently, and consequently, man is too. That's a little bit pessimistic, but see what he's getting at. And another one here. No one trusts a model except the man who wrote it. Everyone trusts an observation except the man who made it. And I think that's rather sound as well. So an interesting character. He wrote very prolifically, quite a few books. Not had time to mention those, but he was very influential. So that's from someone who just happened to go into astronomy by chance, basically, right from the start. So there we are. Yes, some years later, the Dutch astronomer Bart Bok in 1978 wrote, this is a nice summary of it, I think. Shapley did for the Milky Way system what Copernicus had done for the solar system. He placed our sun and Earth in the outskirts of the Milky Way system. He proved conclusively that our sun and Earth are definitely not located close to the center of our galaxy. So that was quite a sobering observation made, but it is very sound. So there we are, that's his life. Interesting character, I think, and very influential.
We clearly got over his shyness.
No, that was Russell.
Oh, was it Russell?
That was Russell, yeah, that was... Yes. Oh, no, I think Chaplin was quite outspoken, actually. Had lots of arguments with Hubble. You know, they weren't in agreement at all about
We got
things.
a photograph of Russell at the NLO
Really?
Yeah, in 1912-14, standing by the big stones that Lockheed had in front of his office.
Oh, no.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, obviously it was quite a big name in astronomy.
And I think Russell was also advisor of the NLO in the early days.
Oh, wow, I didn't know that connection.
Shapley himself has got his own supercluster.
Yes, you're quite right. Yes,
Heading towards it.
yes, indeed.
So if I could ask, did Shapley actually discover sea-feed variable stars? Or I think
No, not really.
somebody earlier discovered them.
Yes.
I think that was
Wasn't an English astronomer, was it?
wasn't that one of the other women at Harvard? They call them
Yeah.
Harvard computers.
That's right, yes.
Henrietta Swan Leavitt.
Yes, you're quite right.
Mm,
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm. But
Can
then,
I ask a question?
Yes. Oh, hello.
If Shapley was the boss of Celia Payne-Koposchkin, was he the one who actually told her that she was wrong and it didn't contain mainly hydrogen and helium?
I'm not sure about that.
He strongly advised her when she was writing her thesis not to emphasise that point too
Yeah,
much.
it was clearly very controversial. So maybe he thought she shouldn't stick her neck out too far. I don't know, but sounds reasonable.
Sounds like quite a character.
Yes, indeed. Yeah. Right, well, that's as much as I planned on Shapley. Can